Hey, John.
Molly,
How are you?
how you
I'm
doing?
so sorry I didn't call you back last.
No, I know. No, it's okay because I know how
I
you
was
do
in
me,
an
Molly.
appointment. It was like
You do
3
me so
hours.
wrong.
No, and I had vacation time to take for this appointment. So it
Okay.
was a long appointment. So it just took me a while.
No
And it
worries.
was like after 5 when I was done. So I was like, I'll just, talk. Like it's, yeah.
No worries. Thank you, Molly.
Okay.
Dr. Sill and I got on about 12 just to test, make sure she.
Oh, you guys already did that. Okay, great.
Yeah, we already did that. So we said that we'll check back about 25 past 12. I believe Dr. New is going to introduce her.
Dr. New is in clinic.
Or would be Graham, I heard.
I spoke to Stacy and she said she would do it. Hey.
Oh, so okay, so now Dr. Graham, so Stacy's gonna do okay. So you got this covered. This is new. The first time I've done it.
Stacy just said because Thomas
She just dropped off.
Thomas asked Thomas asked who was gonna be presenting her, and then Stacy that Tamara knew was in clinic, and she said, I guess I'll do it. So I don't know if Dr. Graham had planned on doing it. I think that
okay.
in the cards, but we need to get that confirmed.
So wait, hold on. I don't mean to cut you off. So, because I talked to Dr. New earlier, I guess this is good for Stacy too. She said, I need Dr. Graham. She just texted me now because I asked if she was going to introduce. She said she's in clinic. She said, Dr. Graham may do it now. Dr. New just texted me. I need Dr. Graham to introduce Dr. Silva. I hope to catch at least part of the talk while I'm in sickle neutral clinic, of course.
Did Dr. Graham, I think he might have it on his radar. I feel like I talked to Jan and I feel like I can text Jan and say, or I can give her a quick call and see if Dr. Graham's okay with doing that.
Yeah.
If not, because I know Stacy, you said that you would do it too. So I just want to make sure.
I can do it, but obviously if Doug is willing and able to do it, then he would be better.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's what I got from Dr. New. So
let me text Jan really fast.
All right, sounds good.
Okay, here we go. Is Dr. I can't type.
Thank you, Molly.
Yeah, of course. Oh, and John, I need to forward you something so we can get CME credit for today. I'm just going to forward you a form really quick for Dr. Silver. I meant to do it. I normally do it before. And I'll explain. It's literally just to get CME credit. It's just like a quick.
Who gets the credit? Is that Dr. Silver? She signs off on something?
Yeah, it's just to make sure that, like, what's the word I'm looking for? It's like a medical disclosure form. So just to say, she's okay, it doesn't have any weird, Stacey, I don't really know what the form entails that we have to get them to fill out. It's just like if they never spoke with children's or for a talk before, it's just a few questions.
It's all around conflict of interest. And
yeah,
sure.
Thank you.
Okay. Oh, yeah, please send me the form.
Okay, it's super quick, and then you just need to have her either make the date for the day of the talk, so today or yesterday.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, it's going to be really fun when AIR has CME credit, because I'm going to have to probably have all of those lab students fill out all of those forms.
Okay.
See, I got talk titles for Mujang and Jason, so I'm good. We got everything settled for June 22nd, so I'll get that up on the calendar.
Perfect.
Yep. I know, like, everybody sent it to me, everything I needed, like right away. I was really happy. which never happens. So.
Currently is on the medical. She currently is on the medical staff at Mass General, Brigham and Women's, and the Spalding Rehab Hospitals. And Dr. Silver directs the very successful Harvard Medical School Women's Leadership CME course. She's a subject matter expert on workforce diversity, equity, inclusion. And this is really the reason we invited her here. And she's the guest of our Aflac DEI committee. She's published many studies and reports related to workforce gender equity and has published on workforce disparity that include race and ethnicity, as well as patient care disparities. And her work, her scholarly work has been published in many high impact journals. In addition, Dr. Silver is very interested in promoting wellness for faculty and staff by analyzing how they're valued and respected for their important contributions. She's developed and has led numerous high impact strategic initiatives, including initiatives such as Her Time Is Now campaign, the Be Ethical campaign, Need Her Science campaign, and the Walks Do Talk Challenge. So it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Silver, and we're really excited about having her spend time with us and our faculty over the last couple of days.
Thank you so much for the kind invitation. I really appreciate it. I want to start with disclosures, and I put this slide up to remind myself and to say that this work actually costs faculty money and time. The people that do this work, by and large, are doing it in their off hours. They're not being compensated for it. And so I just kind of put this up, and I'll talk a little bit more about this, but just as a reminder that there is a cost to this work, and it usually comes from the faculty members themselves. And as I start, what I'm really trying to do with this talk is I'm trying to sort of give you a framework for how you might want to approach things. And some of this you may already be doing, and some of it or may be new to you, but just sort of a framework of how to think about things and how to approach things, and making sure that there's some understanding of the work that's been done and the science that's been done. So one of the things that I try to do is just kind of create a couple buckets to start with. One is patient care disparities, and the other is workforce disparities. And when I talk about those things, I often refer to this paper that I wrote, and I got a grant for this paper, and the grant was from the Arnold P. Gold Foundation, and it was called a Mapping the Landscape grant. And the whole point of this grant was to write a review, and that's what their whole grant category was for this Mapping the Landscape, was to write a review that would help researchers really take things to that next level, to figure out what do we know, where are there gaps, and how can we map the landscape for for clinical care and patient care and research and so on. And as we think about things, and when we sort of think about like what we're looking at, we often look at demographic information like sex and gender and race and ethnicity and so on. And then we also often talk about social determinants of health. And those can be environmental and economic, access to food, for example, grocery stores nearby, a food desert, things like that. And so when I talk to our faculty in my department and I start saying, you have this grant, are there ways that you can add to what you're already looking at by starting to look at demographic information or social determinants of health? And then when I share this information with leaders at our institution or whatever, I'm always talking about how our faculty are focusing on disparities in both patient care as well as the workforce, and that there's relationships between these, which doesn't mean that there's direct correlations and one thing absolutely influences another, but there certainly are relationships. And you see that. You see that in people's research. When you see a researcher and they're very focused on patient care disparities, very frequently, they're someone from an underrepresented group, and they're thinking also about workforce disparities and so on. So let's start with patient care disparities and kind of quickly go through a few things, just kind of the way I think about it, the way that I train our faculty and so on. And so, part of this is basically looking at clinical care, research, and medical education. And those are the three legs of the academic stool. So that's kind of anyone that's in academic medicine is usually thinking about those three things. So clinically, we want to address disparities in patient care, absolutely. In research, one way that I tell people that they may want to start is to look at the literature that's been done already, and then think about doing a mapping the landscape review. And very frequently, that type of review will get cited a lot. And it really helps. It helps establish you as an expert, and it helps really map the landscape for other people. And so that's a really great way to do it. There's different types of reviews, of course, scoping reviews, narrative reviews, systematic reviews, etc. And there's different reasons why each one might be better than another, depending on the body of literature. And certainly in pediatric hem-onc, there may not be enough literature to do a systematic review, but don't discount scoping reviews and narrative reviews. They're super helpful. And then in terms of medical education, that's really what I'm doing here today. I'm talking about the science in a medical education format, making sure that we disseminate good science. So as we start thinking about the strength of the science, especially when it comes to patient care disparities or workforce disparities, we kind of need to think through, like, all right, what do we actually know? Do we just have a single study? Was it a small study? Was it a big study? Was it a randomized controlled trial? Are there multiple studies showing the same thing? Was this reproducible? Are there reviews? Are there clinical practice guidelines? So really trying to think through, because what I often see is that that people, when they're talking about, for example, a new oncology treatment, they're very sophisticated in how they talk about the science and so on, and they understand the difference between a small study done in a single institution and a systematic review, for example. But when people start talking about disparities research, they often aren't quite as rigorous in their thinking. And I really want you to bring the same scientific rigor in your own thinking to to the evidence base, and to understand like what there is and what there isn't. So to map the landscape in my specialty, one of the things that I did with colleagues is I did a patient review on Hispanic disparities and on Black patient care disparities. And this was actually done, we started these before this recent interest and uptick in race and ethnicity, but I thought it was very interesting and helpful for our specialty to start to see, all right, here's where the gaps are. And we have a specialty that is somewhat similar to peds hem-onc in that, or in sickle cell disease, that can be underserved populations and things like that. And it's hard, it can be hard to do a systematic review. So we did a narrative review. But one thing we could do with the narrative review is we could start to tell the story. And you can see that here where we took 3 different studies and we combined them and made one figure and just started to tell the story. And it's important to tell the story, to make sure that we understand, the science that we're presenting, and to tell that story when we're presenting it in formal medical education settings and so on. And so, we certainly know from looking at past research and things that women have been underrepresented in clinical trials. And we have some evidence to show that other underrepresented groups, studies have mostly been about sex or gender. Those are 2 related but slightly different terms, because that's the data that was gathered. But one of the things that I wanted to do as things were happening with the vaccine is I wanted to, I started thinking about this, and I started thinking, wow, we should really know, as everybody's talking about the vaccine trials and whether this group is represented equitably or not, and so on. I wanted to really know, like, what's been done in the past. And so, kind of pushing the limits of my own expertise, what I decided to do was recruit some well-known infectious disease folks, including Carlos Del Rio, who is at Emory and is one of the foremost authorities in infectious diseases, and did a study looking on clinicaltrials.gov at all the vaccine trials to date to try and inform the future researchers about what was happening with these three underrepresented groups. So it was women, older individuals, and racial and ethnic minorities. Those were the three conventionally underrepresented groups. And I also did this in my own specialty. And so we went on clinicaltrials.gov. And by the way, if you have a clinical trial, you're supposed to register it on clinicaltrials.gov. You are supposed to put in age data and race ethnicity data and sex data. And so if you haven't done that, you are supposed to, and you're supposed to put your results. So we wanted to know what the study showed. So we wanted to know, are these groups equitably included in prior vaccine clinical trials? And what we found was, fairly straightforward in terms of variability of reporting, wide variability of reporting, with age being particularly problematic in terms of how clinicaltrials.gov actually asks for age, because you could just have like one older person in that trial, and then it would be counted as older people were included and so on. But this was some of the data that we found. And then just as a summary, we're talking about the folks that were underrepresented versus overrepresented and so on. So just kind of drilling this down and looking at this. And I'm not expecting you to remember all this. I'm just trying to sort of give you more of the approach that we used. And so what we found was that there was really poor race and ethnicity reporting. There was underrepresentation among minorities and older adults, but there was overrepresentation among women or female adults. And that's very interesting because, again, remember that women are usually underrepresented in clinical trials. And so I'm curious what you think about that. And maybe you can put it in the chat function, but I'll give you a little hint. First of all, we didn't study causality. So that's really important. People get that mixed up a lot, and I'll come back to that again. We did not study causality, so we don't know why women are overrepresented. But my sister's a pediatrician, and she has a theory. And I took it back to the team, and I said, here's my sister's theory. What do you think? And they actually thought that was a really good point, and maybe she was right. So if you put it in the chat function, we can see what your ideas about why women are overrepresented. So now switching gears and just saying, okay, well, what about my specialty in physical medicine and rehabilitation? We can sort of compare this to US Census data, and we can see these different things. Now, one thing that's super interesting about this is if you look at the far left, spinal cord injury, wow, we have hardly any women we're looking at in this category. Now, we do know that more men get spinal cord injuries than women do because of some of the risk-taking behavior that men have compared to women. In terms of accidents, gun violence, things like that. But the fastest growing population of people with spinal cord injuries are actually older women with cervical myelopathy. They have cervical stenosis, and that encroaches on their spinal cord, and they develop quadriparesis. And so that population really needs to be studied. As we have an aging population in general, we certainly should be focusing on these women. So one of the things that I did when we published the study is I went to some of the spinal cord injury researchers and I said, hey, this isn't being studied. You could get a grant on this. There's a really big gap here. This is super important. So as you start to kind of think about things and you can say, all right, here's what the data are showing, this is what we're comparing it to, this is our benchmark and so on. And you can see, how we're hitting benchmarks, and benchmarks are kind of what we talk about in terms of equity. So usually in science, what we're trying to do is look at some sort of benchmark, not usually a 50-50 mark. All right. And so we looked at whether people were overrepresented or underrepresented in these different categories. And I mentioned that women were overrepresented in the pediatric trials, or sorry, in the vaccine trials. but I got pediatrics on my mind because my sister's the pediatrician, and it does have to do with pediatrics. There's another hint, but and that they were underrepresented in the physical medicine rehabilitation trials. And so just kind of thinking through these differences and sort of, what has been done already on patient care and so on. So now as we kind of work through things and say, all right, well, what else do we know about patient care types of studies? And I put this one up because I know that with sickle cell disease and so on, you do think a lot about pain, and you're in pediatrics, and pediatric pain has pain management has been shown some disparities for different populations. And one thing I just wanted to really highlight is that I have seen these types of studies presented many times. And what happens very frequently is the speaker will say, we're for African-American children, we don't give them as much pain medication, or whatever group is not receiving as much pain medication. And they'll highlight the disparity, and they'll say, and that's due to implicit bias, which is unconscious bias. Well, actually, we don't know what that's due to, because it's probably multifactorial, and we often, though not always, we often do not study causation. It is very complicated to study causation. It's usually multiple reasons, but it's really important not to conflate what you found as a disparity with causation. It certainly may be due to unconscious bias, and there's a likelihood that unconscious bias at least plays a part. And maybe if people are more aware, they would give African-American children and adults and so on more pain medication and such. But I think that it's really, really important as you think about disparities research, whether you're reading it or whether you're talking about it and so on, to make sure not to conflate the disparity that was found with causality. So as we kind of transition and think a little bit more about workforce, which I'm going to get to next, I wanted to highlight this interesting sort of graphic, because what these researchers did is they said, look, we know all these things already. We know how journals are not fair to women, and we have a lot of research on that. We know that there's barriers, all along the publishing path for women in medicine, women physicians and scientists. We know that there's a lot of research there. But what hasn't been really looked at is if a manuscript described findings in women versus men, was it less likely to be accepted by a journal? Did reviewers and editors actually just think that research on women just isn't as important if it's the same topic? So we're not talking about women only topics like menstruation or whatever. And in fact, reviewers were almost twice as likely to recommend publication for research conducted in men than the same research conducted in women. That's fascinating. Now, again, we don't know causality, but that's very, very interesting. That even, when the research has the same level of quality and so on, if we just switch the sex of the population, it's more or less likely to get published. So let's switch gears and talk about workforce disparities. So that's a little bit of kind of how I approach patient care disparities. And one of the things that we know from workforce disparities is that we have tons of research on this. So for people that are somewhat new to this, there is a gigantic body of research on this, on workforce disparities, primarily gender-related disparities, because that's just been done a lot longer, and it's also easier to do. It is easier for a variety of reasons that have to do with usually self-disclosure on race and ethnicity. So that can be a rate-limiting step. So one thing we know is don't assume change will happen. This was the critical mass theory, which is about 30% or so. So when about 30% of women get into the pipeline, then things will change on their own and you don't need to worry. And that's been disproven time and again. And most specifically, pediatrics has been a prime example, a really big example we talk about all the time in disparities research about how this critical mass theory doesn't work, because it didn't happen in pediatrics. And it's been like way more than 30% for a very long time. So pediatrics and OBGYN are the two classic examples that are used all the time about how that doesn't work. So basically, researchers said, look, we have to throw that critical mass theory out the window, and we have to start looking for critical actors. And we have to start getting people that really understand this research. And so one thing that I think is really helpful is this study that came out at the end of last year. And I think it's helpful, but I also think it's probably the most discouraging study that I've read, and one that discouraged so many of us as we got to the middle of the pandemic and vaccines were just starting to come out. We were all just absolutely exhausted. I volunteered to go to the front line from the start. I know many, many, many people that were working on the front lines from the get-go. And, this sample was a large sample, 134 medical schools, and showed no apparent narrowing in the gap to associate professor and full professor over a 35-year period. And that's more than my entire career. And that was so discouraging. I mean, just really, really, really discouraging. And one of the things we have to really think about that is we have to say what we have done hasn't worked. We have to just be upfront about that and say it has not worked. And we have to do something different. And if we don't believe science, then we'll just keep doing the same things. So one concept that a biostatistician helped me with on one of my papers was we found a lot of zeros. And he said, we can't really do statistical tests on zeros very easily, but there's this concept in the US courts, including the Supreme Court, called the inexorable zero. And the inexorable zero is basically a true zero or near zero number that gives a prima facie inference of discrimination, an on its face inference of discrimination. Basically, if you see a zero or near zero number, you say, there's no possible way. It is not possible to have 0%. In this case, I use 0 to 1%. I made the decision to set it at 0 to 1% as my inexorable zero. To have 0 to 1% Black and Hispanic or Latina women full professors. It's just in almost every specialty. It just doesn't make any sense. And look, this includes pediatrics. It's so low. There's just no explanation for this other than discrimination, because we know you all work with so many talented BIPOC women that it can't be that low. So, and we see this in chair studies too. Now keep in mind, when you're recruiting a chair, you have the entire country to look. The entire country you can look. And you can even look throughout the world if you want. There's really no reason to have super low numbers of women, and particularly BIPOC women. And so as you listen to this is really critical actor training and trying to think through, what data and statistics and so on tell us. And one thing that we know is that task forces and committees and things like that can make things worse, not better. And this is something I shared with a lot of people I met with, including Dr. Graham. And I said, this is something that we talk about a lot in DEI work, because what happens is there's a task force or committee that is appointed, and the leadership is reassured, well, something's being done. We have all these talented people on this task force or committee. They're going to do something. It's going to be great. Don't worry. And in fact, we should be worried, because it's not working. And so let's talk about why it doesn't work. Well, we have some people at the top, and they're paid for their work, the dean, the president, the CEO, the chair, etc. And then they choose some leaders in DEI and usually give them a small amount of money to do this work. And usually that's in the form of their own compensation. They very often don't have any budget, or if they do have a budget, it's very low. So they themselves get not very much compensation to do the work, not very much time or FTE, and there's no budget or very little. And then their job is to recruit all these people from across the institution, most of whom are from underrepresented groups. Now, as an associate chair of a department that has more than 150 faculty, I can tell you that this model is a really bad return on investment, because what we do in our department, I have a wonderful chair. and he is very inclusive, and he has a very diverse faculty. So he's hired all these early career and mid-career diverse faculty, and they are not able to get promoted equitably. They are not able to get grants equitably. They're not able to get published equitably. And they're asked to sit on all these committees and task forces and volunteer. And so we participate in this, and it's tricky. It's very tricky. So the return on investment is very problematic when you have a whole bunch of people doing volunteer work, especially if those people have disparities to begin with or are from underrepresented groups. What we want to do is make those committees and task forces more efficient and effective. We want more Black and less red. And so we want less volunteer time. We don't want people to spend hours and hours and hours. That's academic citizenship, not academic scholarship. We want to give them more academic credit for the work that they're doing on these committees and more compensation. And these committees should be funded, and they should be driving certain metrics. So one of the things that I shared with some of the people I met with is, what graph could you show me in 6 months that showed a trajectory up? What's the goal here? What's the metric you're going to use to show me that you have a graph that goes up? And then how does that fit into the context of the work that you're doing? How impactful is that? Are you showing me just a little thing and had a little drop in the water? Or are you showing me something really impactful that's a game changer? Or, some variation of that. So I do think that task forces and committees are very helpful. I participate in them myself. I often feel like they are very ineffective and that they take way too much of my time, and I'm asked to gather data, I'm asked to do the analysis, I'm asked to write up the paper, I'm asked to do all these different things that really they could hire someone to do, and then they could bring me in for my expertise, and I could still get my name on the publication and so on. So I think that there's ways to be effective, but I think what we've learned from the past is that these task forces and things generally are not well funded, and they're not strategic, and they're not driving results. And so, when we surveyed women and we asked them, how much work are you doing on this academic citizenship? Because we actually need to get you to do academic scholarship so we can get you promoted and paid more and so on. And so these are some of the types of academic citizenship. One of the ones that I find particularly troubling is using BIPOC women in photos and so on, creating an illusion of inclusion rather than true inclusion. So I think that that's really, really important to make sure that when people are representing, that there's real inclusion. And diversity is not the same thing as inclusion. So diversity is what your faculty, who your faculty are. Inclusion is, are they representative at every level, including chairs, including full professors, et cetera, at every level. And so, when you start thinking about this, you start thinking, well, who am I trying to convince here? Who am I trying to convince? And when I give talks like this, there's really 3 groups of people. There's the people that already agree with me, and I'm like, great, I'm glad you agree with me, but I'm not really here for you. You already agree with me. And there's the people who don't agree with me, but are reasonable. They're reasonable. I can talk to them. I can say, here's the science. You may not have seen all of this, you may not have heard all this, but you're a reasonable person. And then there's the people that were never going to agree with me. And I'm not really here for them either. So I'm always here for the reasonable people. That's who I'm talking to today. That's anytime I give a talk, that is who I'm talking to. I am talking to the reasonable people that like science and that believe science, people that believe science. So as we kind of think through, we say, all right, well, what angle are you going to use? The patient care angle is a tough one to use because there's not enough studies that sort of show one group is better at treating patients than another group. And I'm not even sure that those are the right studies to do. I'm not sure I believe those studies, or, I'm just not sure about that. I think sometimes they have some value to them. The ethical angle, that's great. But guess what? It's been unethical to treat people unfairly for, forever. And so that clearly hasn't worked. When we talk about ethics, there's a lot going on that's not ethical. It's unethical to not pay people fairly. There's a lot of issues and it still hasn't changed enough. And so ethics aren't going to totally work, but financial, that's your strongest angle. So if you're ever going to make change, and that's why I started this workforce part with the finances, because it's a bad return on investment for any chair or any dean or any division chief to hire a diverse workforce and not get them promoted and not help them to get the grants that they deserve and so on. It's just a bad return on investment for the institution and the division and so on. So remember, I told you who I'm here for. This is a model of organizational change. And importantly, on the left-hand side, you see that these are the people that sort of agree, and they're cognitively flexible, and they like to connect, and they say, yes, we're into this. And when you have to bring an idea to a bigger group, it often dies in the chasm. This is where a lot of startup companies fail and so on, is they die in the chasm. They can't be brought to a larger group. And the way to bring diversity, equity, inclusion to a larger group is with data. And that's where your early majority is going to be. Your early majority is going to be a lot of people who want to be allies. They want to be allies, but they need more data and they need more information. And so they're the people we need to spend time with. And that is always why I give a talk like this. My area of expertise is in cancer rehabilitation. This visiting professorship, I love being here with you, but it doesn't help get me promoted. I lose clinical income. This is an academic citizenship more than a scholarship visit for me. And I am always here for the reasonable people who are the early majority who want more data, because that is how change happens. Change doesn't happen with the people that already agree with you, and it doesn't happen with the people that resist way at the end. Now, the people way at the end, the laggards, those are your confirmed racists and sexists, all right? Nothing you say is going to change. No amount of science, nothing is going to change. I'm never here for those folks, never. So let's focus on the triple aim. You know the triple aim, because, and some people will call it the quadruple aim, bringing in a physician and caregiver satisfaction or staff satisfaction, but we know improving health outcomes, improving patient satisfaction, and lowering the cost, but doing those three things together, that's the hard part. So you can do one or two or three, but it's hard to do them together. So let's talk about workforce triple aim. So pay equity. All right. So anytime somebody says to me, we pay people equitably, then I'm also like, well, show me your promotion data then, and show me your promotion data at the top. And then a harassment-free workplace with a good work-life balance. So all three of those things. So anytime somebody tells me that they pay equitably or that they promote equitably or anything, first of all, I don't believe it at first sight, because I want to see how the data is presented and sliced and diced and things like that. But also I want to see if they're doing all of these things at the same time, or if they're just cherry picking. So pay equity. We know all of these things from really good studies that pay disparities start early, they last throughout people's career, they cost millions of dollars, and they're worse with debt, etc. And this is a systematic review looking at pay disparities, and 46 articles, and they controlled for covariates. And that's really important, because a lot of times when you see pay data, it won't control for different variables like part-time work and so on. And so sometimes people, really go crazy about pay equity studies, but there's actually really good pay equity studies. And by the way, in terms of research, if you want to look at a huge, gigantic, unbelievably big body of evidence, it is on gender pay disparities. It is done in every single industry. There's really no one that should be a pay gap denier. And yet there are pay gap deniers. And so that's fascinating, actually, that we have people, and I'm going to get to that, because I have been thinking about the pay gap deniers and thinking, how could they possibly deny this? So this is actually a study that was done where they took into account different covariates and found a gender-related pay gap. And I published this in the journal Neurology. And what I wanted to show was a conservative estimate of how much money women would lose over their careers, women neurologists with this pay gap. And it's in the millions. It's in the millions. which is quite significant. Now, if I said to anyone at the end of their career, you could have an extra $2 or $3 million for a relatively small pay gap, it wasn't huge, it was $30,000 a year. And so that gets at this issue of negotiation. You know, we have federal laws against paying people unfairly, and we also have states strengthening their laws to make sure people aren't paid unfairly. And so this idea of expecting someone who is, you know, a woman or an individual who is from an underrepresented group, and that could be a sexual minority group, it could be someone from who is BIPOC, it could be someone with an intersectional identity, meaning they have more than they identify with more than one underrepresented group. But the idea that they should have to negotiate their way to fair pay is ridiculous. That is really, I mean, talk about unethical. That's ridiculous. And there's a lot of literature to support that. That is not how hires should be done. Hires should be done fairly. So when we look at things, when people say, well, it's RVU, so it's fair. Well, wait a minute, we have structural racism and organizational gender bias baked into almost everything we do. And so when we look at a biopsy of a penis, which urologists who are primarily men do, they're going to get a lot more money than a woman who's an OBGYN will get for a biopsy of a vagina. And there's very few people who are going to say that one biopsy is a lot harder than the other. I mean, that's really a hard thing to defend. And this whole paper is about these differences and so on. So I started thinking about why people are denying pay gaps when it's like the evidence is so clear. And I started to think, well, it's probably because women are publishing these studies. And it's probably because women are citing these studies. And women are disseminating these studies on social media, but men are making the pay decisions. So men who are leaders may not have seen these studies. They may not realize how much evidence there is, and that when they deny pay gaps, they're basically anti-science. So I did this study and I looked at it and I found that indeed women primarily do pay gap studies, women primarily cite them, and women primarily disseminate them on social media. And most of the studies are unfunded, which brings me back to slide number 2, where I showed you the piggy bank that was so hurt. That brings us into our talk about debt and compensation. So now you take unfair debt and you layer that with high education costs. So when you take unfair compensation and you layer that with high educational debt, what do you get? And there's a bunch of studies looking at specialty choice and things like that, but that's not what I was interested in. What I was interested in is this affecting the choices that women are making? And could those choices be affecting promotion or wellness? And so look over here on the right-hand side in the red box, and we start to see, wait a second, joining professional societies and obtaining CME and working in a setting that offers lower compensation like academia. So this study was really the first to show that it was affecting things, that high educational debt was affecting things like burnout and work and lifestyle choices. And that is super important, because here's the thing. If you study educational debt separately from compensation, it's not the same as the financial stress equation. The financial stress equation really has to do with high educational debt and low compensation or unfair compensation. So even in places like Mayo Clinic, they're saying, look, we pay people fairly. And then they say, but we don't promote people fairly. And so even in studies where they put out this kind of information, they still say, you know what, we're not promoting equitably. So let's talk about promotion. There's 4 gatekeepers to promotion. And these are the different gatekeepers, and I'm not going to talk about all of them because I don't have time, but one of them is medical societies. And the reason that I decided to take on medical societies with my research is because I realized that we were asking our faculty to spend money out of their own pockets to go to medical societies and present their research and speak nationally and do that. And almost every promotions criteria looks something like this. And this is a clinical innovation track, so it's not a research track. And you still need invitations to speak nationally. And by the way, it's really hard to speak nationally if you aren't publishing. It's very unlikely to get up and be invited to be a speaker nationally and get to full professor and so on if you're not publishing. You need to be the editor of a journal, developing guidelines, all of these different things. And this is, again, a clinical track. And I know that there's different tracks. There's a service track at Emory and so on, but still medical societies are really important. And that national work is how you get to full professor. And so if medical societies are not treating your faculty fairly, then they're not going to be able to get to full professor. And you're going to see those big gaps. So as we're telling our early career folks that they need to be spending their money on medical societies, and by the way, we in our departments are investing heavily in professional fees and so on to support medical societies, we're basically paying to have our faculty discriminated against. And to me, that wasn't okay. And the reason is because the money flows the other way. This is the only thing where the money flows the other way. The money flows out of their bank account, putting them further in debt. Now, in my mind, that's pretty morally reprehensible. Like, we can't do that. So I wanted to really kind of kick the door open on this issue, and I started doing research on it, and I really led the way in a whole field of study on medical societies, and many other people have done this work now. So it's really become its own unique area of study. In this study, so I wasn't trying to be a recognition award researcher. I was trying to just show that medical societies don't treat our faculty fairly. So in this study, what I found was for the past 4 years in a row that no women physicians were given awards. Now, just imagine a stadium, an auditorium rather, with thousands of people. So you're sitting there, there's thousands of people, and not one single woman gets an award. So you see a man physician get award, and then there's another man physician who gets award, and then there's another man physician award. Then you go back the next year, and you repeat the same cycle, and you go back the next year and you repeat the same cycle, and you go back the next year and it repeats again. That's pretty amazing. Now, why didn't anybody stand up and say, this is outrageous? These are just men awards. These aren't awards for everyone. This is outrageous. Why didn't anybody stand up and say that? I don't know. But I'll tell you what, they started to pay attention when I put it in the literature. So then people said, well, women should nominate women. That's what men do. Men nominate each other. So women should nominate women. I'm like, well, chairs and deans really often nominate faculty, and chairs and deans are primarily men. So I think men should be nominating women. And also, I don't think it's women's job to nominate women. Just, that's not how you fix everything. You don't ask the oppressed group to fix the problems. You ask the group that's in power to fix the problems. And so in the early career group, there were no women nominated. Sorry, in the mid-career group, I'm sorry about that. Mid-career and senior group, there were no women nominated. Now, imagine that. No one nominated mid or senior women. And I want you to really have conversations with your mid-career and senior women, because what you will hear over and over again is, yeah, I got mentoring in my early career. I got support in my early career. I did not get support mid-career or later. Women were nominated in the early career, but none of them made it past the committee. The committee nixed every one of them, including someone I nominated with an absolutely amazing bio running one of the biggest clinical trials in the country, who got the award after the paper came out. So different causality there. So then I said, it's not just my specialty. Let's just cherry pick and look for zeros. And we found them in all kinds of specialties. We just cherry picked the zeros and said, look, they're everywhere. You can find inexorable zeros everywhere in all these specialties and so on. And you really can't justify it, because there really are more than 0 women who deserve awards. And there's more than 0 women who deserve to be professor. And there's more than 0 women who deserve to be chairs and anything else. And so we looked at the representation in medical societies and found that 10 medical societies had 0 years of women's leadership over the past decade. And 4 other medical societies really led the way. So it can be done. It can be done with intention. We looked at invited speakers and found that women were underrepresented in most specialties. And when we started to drill things down, we found that women physicians were particularly underrepresented. And we've seen that in a number of their studies, which is really important, not to further discriminate against women PhDs, but just to recognize that women MDs may be even sort of more challenged in terms of barriers because of, because they're busy with clinical work, because they don't have the same training, and nobody's really looking out as much for women physicians. So harassment-free work environment, super important. I'm going to go through this quickly and I'll close, but medicine is known to be a place where there's very high rates of sexual harassment and gender-related harassment. And that is really, really troubling. And one of the things that's very important to recognize is that there's not very many bad men or bad people, because most of this is actually perpetrated by men, and the science shows that. There's not very many. And I often, when I started presenting some of the findings of the NASM report, I would see these men and these early career men, and they'd just be like, oh my gosh, more than half the women are sexually harassed. And that's got to be me, or maybe like my buddy or whatever. And I said, no, it's not you. You're a good person. You are not doing it. Here's what's happening. We have some bad apples, and they are allowed to keep being bad apples, and no one is stopping them. And so you see one bad apple hurting a whole bunch of people. And we see that time and again, and certainly in the cancer letter, you saw that recently as well. And so, new NIH advisory committee on addressing sexual harassment has come out strong, said we're part of the problem. We have to be part of the solution. Yes, indeed, that's true. And so really important to kind of think about these things. Final thoughts for you. If you are a man and you ever walk by a line of women like this again, I hope you will never have the same thought that you have had previously, that this is okay. You should be so upset that this exists, because guess what? Women have time poverty, and it is incredible privilege to be able to walk into a bathroom and use it without a wait. And women have stood in line forever, and it's an international problem. And the reason they stand in line is because the bathrooms are not constructed for women. They don't take into account basic physiology. Now, this comes into fix the structure or fix the woman. So here's the fix the woman. Let's fix the women. Let's make them go to the bathroom faster. We can put them into menopause, and so they don't menstruate. We can have them not take their kids to the bathroom. Maybe their kids can just wear diapers forever. We could do all kinds of things to fix the women. That doesn't really make sense. Maybe if we just do a little design thinking, a little design engineering, we could fix the structure, and it would be super easy, and everyone could go to the bathroom at the same throughput rate, and there wouldn't be a line. That would be a super easy problem to solve. And so we have to start approaching problems more like scientists and less, like we're accepting these incredible inequities that are really ridiculous. And I can tell you that the men in my life, they do not pass by a line like that when I'm standing there with my daughters waiting to go to the bathroom without saying, this is really wrong. This is really wrong. These women should not, my wife and my daughters should not have to stand in line like that. That is ridiculous. So a DEI task force formed to try to get women a lactation room. Now we're talking about like a group of 20 women physicians working on getting one lactation room. That is such an easy ask. I run conferences all the time. I can tell you it is super easy to book a lactation room. And so one of my comments is really, solve the problem and stop wasting women's time. I mean, it's pretty simple. I mean, some of these problems are really, really, really that simple. And don't forget about your mid-career and your senior women, because they have many, many disparities and very little support. So whenever you're thinking about DEI work, please remember them. Thank you so much for having the opportunity to speak with you all today.
Thank you very much, Dr. Silver, for a wonderful, and if you're reading the comments in the chat, and even eye-opening discussion today. I open the remaining time we have to questions, so feel free to either take yourselves off mute or to type your questions in the chat. Dr. Castellina, I think you have a question.
I just want to thank Julie for her candor, but for data that many of us have lived, but it is really nice to have the data to support the fact to open eyes to move forward.
Thank you. And thank you for the wonderful work that you're doing as well. I know you're a real leader and someone so many people look up to. And I heard that the whole time from all my different talks, Dr. Castellina. Someone mentioned in the vaccine study that women might be protective and cocooning and so on. And I think that actually might be one of them. I also think just that women take their kids to the doctor. And as my sister says, she says, if you want to know who takes the kids to the doctor, it's the moms. That is who takes their kid to the pediatrician in general. And she said, as we're signing people up for different studies or whatever, the moms sometimes jump on board too. And so it's just easy for the mom to, join a vaccine trial with her child when she's in the pediatrician's office. So I hope, yeah, go ahead.
No, I wanted to highlight that I think one of our colleagues actually pointed out that possible theory in the chat. And it sounds like yet another is actually commenting on the same thing related to COVID. I think your last comments were pretty insightful in terms of, the study on queuing and actually having, our allies and other individuals actually speaking up and being part of the solution. Can you talk a little bit more to that and maybe the real world implications as it comes to, or I shouldn't say real world, that's also real world, but the professional implications as it comes to, promotion and hiring and pay equity?
Right. And so, one of the things that I think that we really need to understand is how systems were built many years ago when women weren't even in medicine at all, how the systems were built and how those same systems continue. So just as an example, journals were built many journals were built a long, long time ago when women really weren't in medicine very much at all. And so a lot of the path to being an editor, it was, somebody that a male editor knew, a friend or whatever, and also that person could leave their family, be away from their family, go on retreats or do whatever, and that they wouldn't need to be paid. They could just volunteer. And so that's a model. When you start looking at educational debt and compensation, and you start looking at women with intersectional identities, for example, Black women, or a first generation person, you start looking at that and you say, how does that model work? Are they going to be able to leave their kids and their family? Are they going to be able to work for free? Is that structure the right structure? And then you start to say, well, wait a minute. The journals say they can't afford it. So I went to the 990s of the medical societies of the journals that own them, all these different medical societies, and I put it in the Her Time Is Now report and basically said, look, these medical societies, the top, I can't even remember the number exactly, but let's just say the top 20 medical societies, they're bringing in like $1.4 billion. I mean, they have got money to pay a Black woman to be an editor at JAMA or another journal. Yes, they do. They have plenty of money to pay people to be editors and so on, all the way up the chain. And so some of the structures, that's what we have to really think about. And we have to look at them in a new way. So that's one of the things that when I give this talk, actually, I'll tell you this, I love this. But I've changed this talk a little bit to try to really engage allies, men who listen to this and just say, have them see the opportunity that they can have to stand up and to step up and to be a great ally. And after this talk, I'm on a streak now. After this talk, I have had men reach out and CC the women that put it together and say, I am going to do such and such. I'm going to be in the early majority. I can do this. So the last time I gave this talk was at a pediatric oncology hospital. And it was like last week. And the head of research said, I am going to collect all of the protected research time, collect data on all of the protected research time and the lab space. And I'm going to see how it shakes out. Who has protected research time? What are they getting paid? How much lab space do they have? He said, I'm the endowed chair of research. I'm going to look for inequities. If there's not, that's great. And if there are, I'm going to fix them. I'm like, you go. That is exactly what and he goes, I am not going to be on the tail end of that. He said, I'm not going to be a laggard. That is not going to be my legacy. Another talk that I gave maybe a month ago to a group in Montreal, it's a research group in Montreal. I'm speaking to them on Friday. And it was one of the men that stepped in and said, I can't believe that women didn't get a word. I know so many talented women. How can it be that we don't have more Black women professors or Hispanic women professors, or that they're not getting awards? What would it take for some man in power to have stood up during the time during the 4 years when no women physicians were given awards and said, guys, we can't do this. This makes us look bad. It looks ridiculous. It looks like you get an award like it's an old boys club. That's not how science should work. We shouldn't be feeling good about that. We just eliminated half the playing field. And in pediatrics, by the way, if something like that happens, you're not eliminating half the playing field. You're eliminating 60 to 70% of the playing field.
Julie, can you speak to the issue of negotiating, either when you're entering or when you're with regard to retention and keeping faculty? Because I think you made a really good point. When I came here, I remember, Bill, I never told you this, but Bev Lange said to me, Bill Woods is my friend, but I want you to go in there and negotiate like a man. And I had really no idea what she meant. So I, called up a few people, but they actually weren't men. They were female mentors and colleagues and got a few pointers, but I don't think that most people really know what that looks like.
Right. So one thing to know, and this is again something that we have to kind of just change our mindset about. Negotiation really is not best practices. That is not best practices. Especially early career, but even later career, it's not really best practices. And what has happened in some states, and it happened in Massachusetts about a year or two ago, I think maybe 2 years ago, is that they strengthened the pay equity laws. And basically hospitals, et cetera, everybody was out of compliance if they weren't paying men and women who were doing the same work fairly or equitably. And so what happened is one of my colleagues had a friend, someone who had been to dinner at her house and so on, who was the chair of her department. And she had been in there almost every year saying, I don't think I'm being paid fairly. I don't think it's equitable. And she'd been reassured, oh, don't worry. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And then she said, as soon as the law went into effect, within 6 months, she had a call from the business administrator saying, we're going to increase your salary by $40,000. And she's like, I went in there every year and said, I don't think I'm being paid fairly. I'm talking to my male colleagues. And a lot of men, by the way, now as a he for she move, will tell women what they're being paid. So they'll say, look, I'm going to be a good ally. I'm going to tell you what I'm being paid. And if you work at a state institution, it's right there on the state site, et cetera. So there's a lot of different ways to find out and get information. And it just isn't okay to pay men and women differently for the same work. It just isn't. So negotiation is really, again, like I showed you in the studies, it's really not considered best practices. And many businesses, they move totally away from that. When they're hiring. And by the way,
I think it's all those extra resources too beyond salary, right? To make you successful.
Oh, right. All the little things. And that's where like being a great ally too is all the little things, the extra like biostats help, the lab space, the, coming through with promises, when you're told you get, you get to a certain level, or you get a K grant, and then you also get extra money and things like that. Those promises should be kept, and those extra things really matter. And so that, being a good ally, and this goes for any leader. And I teach a big women's leadership course. I teach, one of the largest women's leadership courses in the country. And I always tell the women, please use science and data. Do not treat anyone, including all the men, the way that you've been treated. Treat people fairly and use science and data.
Dr. Woods, did you have a comment? Excuse me.
No, I'm pretty sure I treated Sharon fairly from a salary point of view, because Julie, I like what you said. I mean, I basically had paradigms for assistant, associate, full, who came in, how many years of service have you had, et cetera, et cetera. Everyone had to contribute something. It didn't have to be clinical care, teaching, research. It could also be service. And I think I never even looked at sex until somebody shocked me and told me that a survey had been done at pediatric oncologists and showed that women were making 30,000 less than men. So I went back and I appointed a woman to look at our salaries. And what we found out is that there were 5 people not on the scale. 3 were men and 2 were women. And we brought them up so that everybody was on the scale. So it can be done, and I think you're right on. Negotiation is an old way to think about this kind of stuff. So I really appreciate it. And I thought your talk was fabulous.
Thank you so much. And I think you bring up a great point, and I always say this, is that it can go the other way. And so when Google looked at some of its salary things, it found that some men weren't being paid fairly. And what Dr. Woods just said is he found some men weren't being paid fairly. And the goal is to treat everyone fairly. It's not just to lift up underrepresented people and that's all we're going to care about. We're going to care about everyone. I mean, let's have the strongest possible workforce and care about everyone and treat everyone fairly. And that's a big win. And when you look at things like promotion to professor, for example, there's no ceiling on that. Emory never said, okay, we can only have 100 or 200 or 500 and that we're done. You can have as many people reach it as achieve these different metrics. I do think that chairs and deans get a bit of a bad rap because they're pushing against these other structures like medical societies. But and so they're basically sending their faculty over to the medical society. That's where you fill up the things, many of the things on your CV. Then you bring it back to your chair and you say, I want to get promoted. Your chair puts it to the committee and so on. So it's a whole process. Your chair or your dean cannot get you promoted if you can't get those things on your CV. They just can't. They can't get you promoted. It's not a hey, just promote her anyway, just a wink and a smile and the deal's done. It doesn't work like that. You actually have to have legit things. You have to have recognition awards. You have to have a role as an editor. You have to have been published. You have to have given national talks. I mean, you have to have done these things, not all of them, but some of them. And that's the level to full professor. And that's where I'm really focused. So I am not happy at all when anyone tells me about anything that's low level, because I want women at the top where they deserve to be. I want them to get and I appreciate this visiting lectureship because the women often don't get visiting professorships. They often don't get to talk to the leaders at the institution. And so leaders at the institution miss out on those valuable perspectives. And I think that that's really important, the endowed chairs. I think that 64, if HEMONC, if your faculty rather is 64% women, then 64% of the endowed chairs should be held by women. 64% of the full professorship should be held by women. That's what equity looks like. That's equity. If it was 50-50, that would mean that men would have an advantage over women proportionally. So equity looks like what the diversity is on the faculty. And that's the goal. The goal is equity. And it would be different in orthopedics. You know, it wouldn't be fair to basically say to orthopedics, look, half your endowed chairs have to be women, because they don't have the same diversity in that specialty. It's whatever the diversity is in your organization or your specialty or whatever, that's your benchmark. It's equity.
And I think that's a wonderful place to close today's session. I really, truly appreciate you, Dr. Silver, on behalf of Aflac and the ARC lecture series. We are so glad that we had you as a visiting professor. I know you have a number of other conversations with faculty planned today, but Dr. Silver has posted her social media and other contact information. So if you were not able to either ask your question in this setting or wanted to have a discussion offline, please feel free to reach out. Thank you all again for your attendance and your attention, and we will see you in 2 weeks at the next ARC. Bye-bye.
Thank you again.
Everyone. Really appreciate it. Thank you for the invitation and the organization and support, and your staff has been wonderful and the faculty's been fantastic.
Thank you again.